Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the ThreeCameramen podcast. Today, I am once again joined by Daniel.
Hello.
And unfortunately, I am once again not joined by our third cameraman, Finley. Why is that, Daniel?
So I think after last week we had a bit of power struggle. He got kicked out, but unfortunately he seems to have filed a lawsuit against us. So
No way.
it's a bit of a tough case there. But I think we're going to push through it, and hopefully, if we come to some good terms, then by next week he should be back on a podcast for you.
Yeah, we're with a fresh new episode.
Hopefully, fingers crossed we'll get him back.
Fingers crossed. But anyway, all that stuff aside, today we are doing an analysis of Vertigo, a 1958 Hitchcock film. It's a thriller, considered to be one of the best films ever made. Often goes toe-to-toe with Citizen Kane in film polls and film lists to be considered the best film of all time. I feel like that's all the introduction it really needs. It's quite iconic at this point, which is an understatement. So, like with our last episode, Blade Runner, this is not going to be a review. This is going to be mainly for our vision. It's an analysis. We're going to try and cover a lot of topics like authorship, links to Freud, different themes, etc. So, I guess the best place to start with this sort of topic is with the man behind the camera, Alfred Hitchcock. Like with this film, he's considered to be one of the greatest directors of all time. Very iconic, one considered to be a celebrity more than a director in some cases, but a director definitively. There are many different influences he has, which are prevalent throughout the entire film. There are the main ones I would say that are prevalent throughout are Soviet montage, which is influenced by Soviet cinema. He grew up, he trained in German studios, and that was another influence, but we'll get to that in a second. But while he was there, he watched many Soviet silent films by the likes of Fritz Lang. Sergei Eisenstein is a big influence of his. He did Strike and Battleship Potemkin. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Fritz Lang has done Metropolis and Spioni.
Or Spies, yeah.
Or M.
Which is, again, because it's one of the greatest films of all time. And with the Soviet montage, the idea is that it's a combination of seemingly unrelated images that together form a whole narrative, a whole idea. And that combined with the Kuleshov effect, which is taking three pieces of film, let's say first and third are a reaction, and always changing in the middle to change
an example would just be like a man smiling, and first of all, in the first image you see it's like a sandwich, and you can see like, oh, he's hungry. And in the second image it's like a girl, it's like a feeling of lust, and it changes the meaning depending on what the image is intercut with. So that's kind of a example of what the Kuleshov effect is.
What a visceral example that was. And those two elements are combined in one of my favorite scenes in the film, which is the first car following sequence, where not one line of dialogue is shown or heard. It is pure cinema. We only see Scotty's
goes on for about 14
reaction.
minutes, so it's quite long.
Reaction, what he sees in a POV, and then his reaction to that POV. It's just that constantly for the next 14 minutes, and it is very effective. But we'll get into more of that later. Another influence he has, like I said, I mentioned briefly, was German cinema and
German expressionism.
Which was revolutionized in the 1920s after World War I. In this sort of idea, the Germans would try and, without dialogue, because they couldn't do dialogue for the silent era of cinema, they would try and use their production design to accentuate inner emotions or themes. Like with the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the sets are very obscured, very twisted, and that represents the emotions of the character on the screen. Very simple, very effective way to communicate ideas with no dialogue. And that is very prevalent in this film. I would say the most prominent example is in the bathroom scene. There's that prolonged 360-degree rotating shot. and behind Scotty, he's clearly disturbed by something, and the set obscures into a sort of flashback of where Madeleine died. Spoiler alert, she dies.
Well, they both die.
They both die, but spoiler alert for that as well.
Spoiler alert from 1958 film. You're welcome.
Vertigo. And those are the main ones. There's obviously his time working in the silent era as an assistant director. Would obviously influence his personal taste for as little dialogue as possible. He only believes to include it if it's purely essential, and that plays into the idea of pure cinema, which is, I think, at his most realised in this film, which I mentioned earlier, with the 14-minute sequence of absolutely no dialogue, which is just as compelling, and if not more compelling, with or without dialogue. And anything else you want to add to that, Daniel?
Well, if you're kind of talking about like talkies or like pure cinema, you'd basically say they're all part of Alfred Hitchcock's kind of key style. So I think he does definitely have a signature style as a director. And I'd say definitely one of the themes he likes to explore in many of his films is the theme of identity, and we do see this especially in Vertigo, mainly through Madeleine and Judy and the mix up between them. So you obviously have the like identity sort of changing, or kind of Scotty trying to mold Judy into his perfect depiction of Madeleine. I think that's quite interesting, and that's definitely done with
that also gives an element of self-reflexivity, I think is the right way to put it, for the film. Hitchcock is a meticulous director. He demands great control over his actors, and Kim Novak recalls saying, I think it's in one of the books you might have released, that for the initial scene of Scott following Madeleine, she is wearing a grey suit, and she thought that'd be a very bad decision combined with her white hair, and she tried to contend with Hitchcock, and Hitchcock said, no, this is how I want it, it will make the most sense. And in a sense, Hitchcock is Scotty. He is meticulously crafting this idea of Madeleine, the character who's playing Judy, or vice versa. And he was obsessive over the hair, obsessive over the dress, obsessive over the makeup.
Alfred Hitchcock was actually quite infamous for being quite obsessive and controlling over his actors, especially his female actors. And there have been a lot of, I suppose, reports of him kind of being definitely more controlling over his female actors, and kind of just deciding what they should wear, how they should act.
Especially Tippi Hedren from The Birds and Marnie came out later saying Hitchcock was very inappropriate towards her, but that's and like not appropriate in like the way you would initially think of it, but in like just how controlling he was. Yeah. But I there's arguments that it was all in the sake of art, and there's a lot of debates about this, which we won't go into. But it's just important to know that he was very obsessed with his productions and actors. Yeah. That's why he's become to be known as a lover for blonde women. They are a sort of theme that, or idea, or character that is often in every film he does. I'm trying to think of one that isn't, but I can't think of one at the moment.
North by Northwest?
I haven't seen that film. Is there a blonde woman in that? Or?
I haven't seen it.
Well, from the films I can think of, all the women are blonde, but that could be totally incorrect. Through this, Hitchcock offers very voyeuristic pleasures to the audience, and in as a sort of what's the word? Knock-on effect himself. Alongside this, Hitchcock had a great fascination with Catholicism. He grew up a Catholic. He was forced to be very religious, and as he grew up, he later, I think, no longer wanted to be part of this religion anymore. But he still carries these Catholic ideas into his films, specifically Catholic guilt, and that plays a lot into the sort of forbidden love and forbidden connection most of these films have, especially Vertigo, which is prominent through Scotty and Madeleine. Also in the film, there's a lot of religious imagery, especially specifically the graveyard scene, and also, of course, Madeleine's death, both involve a church, some with organ music. It evokes this very heavenly feel, but also evokes a unsettling thing, or very disturbing plot development that's about to come.
I suppose the Catholic guilt is mainly seen at the end of the film when you have that nun walk up the stairs and you have like just a silhouette, but then obviously Madeleine is like, or not Madeleine, Judy's like immediately out of it. Yeah, she's done well any part of that.
And you also have that shot, the God's eye view shot after M's death, not M's death, that's Madeleine's death. Basically, it's a matte painting, another technique Hitchcock used as opposed to, well, not opposed to green screens, but it was a green screen for a green screen. Of Scotty leaving the murder scene, or fleeing the murder scene, I should say, as Madeleine lays dead on the rooftop of a church. Is almost as if God is judging Scotty for this action, even though you could argue he is definitely judging Gavin in this situation, but you could also argue that this is Scotty's idea of God judging him for something he couldn't control, and in a sense not being the man that he should be, which brings up the theme of masculinity, which we'll go into very shortly, because I think that's one of the along with Obsession, this film's definitely about masculinity and redefining it and sort of exposing it, while also being the subject of the male gaze. But we'll get into that. I think that's a very big thing to get into in a second. In this film, Hitchcock brings back Bernard Herrmann, obviously iconic music composer. I think it was this period between the 1950s and 1960s where he had this sort of prime team of individuals that he always pulled back for his films, and therefore he produced some of his like most career-defining films.
Yeah, I think Herrmann did most of the music.
Yeah, Bernard Herrmann, also Robert Burks for the cinematography, George Tomasky, I think I pronounced that correctly, for the editing. And there's I think there's some similar production designers. And I mean, in fact, I believe the scene where Scotty follow Madeleine and he follows her to the hotel. I can't remember the name of the hotel, but it's where he believes he sees her in the window, but the hotel manager insists that she's not there, and it's proved that she's not there. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
That's the interior of that hotel is very, very similar to the interior of the Bates Hotel in Psycho. And since the films were not made too far apart from each other, it's not unlikely that then they're the same set. They're most likely the same set, redesigned, probably by the same production designers, used in the same backlot. It's all connected, and Hitchcock really had the support of this team to make some of his best films, which is, again, really prevalent in just the quality of the films that are made. So I touched on it like a couple of seconds ago, but this film is about obsession, and with that obsession, it is also about masculinity, and we'll start on that for a second. I won't go too much into this, but there is a lot of phallic imagery in the film. Golden Gate Bridge, church, it's all very male dominated, and that's not only in its production design but also in its characters. Gavin is a prime example of this. I think Gavin is the only quote-unquote real man in the story by stereotypes. He leeches off his wife's family for profit. He uses very sneaky and corrupt tricks to get what he wants. And he uses Scotty, Madeleine, and Judy as sort of his pawns in like a bigger chess game just to suit his needs. This definitely evokes the idea of toxic masculinity. And this is something that consumes Scotty by the end as he drags Madeleine up the church tower. Scotty, on the other hand, is not that masculine by traditional standards. He is wimpish. He is struck by this sort of not sort of this phobia, aquaphobia that consumes him throughout the rest of the film. In the opening sequence where he's chasing the man, and this obviously leads to the policeman's death, it's very interesting how we're not shown or told really how Scotty gets down, because in that situation, I think it's very unrealistic for him to have survived that. And in a sense, that acts as a metaphor for Scotty throughout the rest of the film. He is hanging over this empty abyss, about to fall in, and is just hanging on by a thread. And this is accentuated through his fluctuating emotions and agoraphobia, which eventually leads to another person's death. It's all very cyclical, and it's all very tragic in that sense. And as the plot develops, Scotty becomes harder and harder to sympathize for, as he becomes more and more toxic, more and more controlling, and more obsessive.
So I think, as you were saying about the cyclical structure, that also aligns with the very key motif throughout the entire film, which is of the spirals. I think Hitchcock uses the aggressively colored spirals in the beginning to kind of disorientate the viewer. And then that kind of mirrors sort of what Scotty feels when he has his acrophobia hit.
Yeah, and also in that opening sequence, the score by Bernard Herrmann is introduced, and it's a very cyclical score. It's seemingly never ending. There's never any resolution to the score. It has this ambiguity to it, this uncertainty, and that is definitely in tandem with the visuals of the spirals. I guess we should also develop more of the opening credit sequence. The spirals are very sort of galaxy-like. They sort of evoke this universal feel. This sort of, again, cycle of tragedy and murder and corruption happening in the film. And we also have the first indicator of the male gaze in this film, which was criticized by Laura Mulvey in her essay. I think this film was like one of the main points she had about the male gaze. There's a lot of extreme close-ups of this random woman, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think that was more about kind of the obsession tone that's shown throughout this film, and how the viewers kind of are basically not like told to obsess over this woman and all her details, and that's why they each take their time in a close-up. And you have this kind of, it's sort of it's a very dolled up face. It's a very artificial looking face, which is kind of how Scotty ends up molding Judy into this fake woman, or this woman that she isn't really, that she isn't as Madeline. I think that kind of artificial look mirrors that. And
the artificiality is also helped by the red light that is used over the woman in the opening credits. Sort of evokes a feeling of danger and also passion, which we'll see later on. I think, actually, I'll build on that point with the idea of colours. I think this is an extremely beautiful looking film, which is full of colour. And that colour is most, I think, highlighted in the restaurant scene, where Scotty is forced to, or ordered to, by Gavin to scout out him and Madeleine, just so he can get an idea of who she is, try and get an identity. And I think it's another great example of pure cinema, as there's just this one long shot of sort of tracking shot of Scotty's gaze shifting towards Madeleine, slow zoom into the back of her head with a spiral, like your spiral I think you were talking about a second ago.
Yeah. And
side note, I think apparently Hitchcock was obsessed with like women's backs, like how they turned away. And this sort of idea of forbidden love and Catholic guilt is also important to that, but this is just so many analysis here. And obviously she's wearing a green dress, which stands out from the red background. Sort of
green is also envy or jealousy.
Jealousy, and contrasted against passion and violence. And in just that one shot alone, I think, and that shot of the red sort of increasing in its brightness in that close-up of Madeleine, definitely, in a sense, sums up the entire film in just...
It's like blood.
just too. Yeah, thanks for that really descriptive analysis there, Daniel.
Well, red is like anger or danger.
Yes,
So.
yes. It's such an amazingly so much depth in that scene.
Yeah.
And apparently, fun fact, that scene was never going to. No, that shot of Madeleine looking off in Scotty's POV, and then the reds sort of being lit behind her, was never going to be the final shot. It was the shot was going to be Madeleine looking off and then looking to Scotty and then like matching eyes. But Hitchcock in Jamaica, by the way, this hidden the scene. Hitchcock was in Jamaica and thought actually that wouldn't really work, so he got another director to direct that one shot. A little bit of trivia for you there.
And speaking of final shots, obviously at the time this film released, you had the Hays Code in effect, and this was certainly something that affected a lot of films at the time, and it kind of affected what they could and couldn't show, and there were obviously a lot of restrictions. Such as kind of I think the length of kissing you can have on like prolonged time, or basically the amount of violent material you could show, and also mainly is you have to show kind of a victory for the protagonist. You can't have the villain win. They have to I don't know, meet their demise or face punishment for their action in some way. Interesting enough, the original version, the theatrical release, had this kind of altered scene that Vertigo didn't want to put on but was forced to, it's kind of after Scotty is up the tower, he returns home, and all you hear over this radio is, Gavin Elster's been taken into custody or whatever for the murder of like 2 people or whatever. I don't know what exactly says, but basically you have this radio just playing over, and it's very clearly put in there for the sake of being put in there, just to wrap up all loose ends. But then obviously I think the redone, or the ending Vertigo originally wanted, is far better, and mainly because it leaves the ambiguity at the end of the story, or you don't really know what happens to Scotty after that. He looked down and he's kind of got this like face of awe, but also kind of, I don't know, he's not like in tears, he's not fully upset, but you can see he's obviously quite shocked by it. I think that's just a really good final image for the film there.
And also the Hays Code is very linked to the studio system. This was made in the golden era of Hollywood, which implemented these sort of codes. Another system that was in place was the star system, and the use of James Stewart would have been very significant, as he is known for playing these masculine, heroic roles. He is always like the patriarch of the family, the war hero, the man who, will do anything for his family. And in this film, he's quite frankly the opposite. He's wimpish, and it's actually quite interesting how Hitchcock puts James Stewart in his films, because this Andrea window has him sort of held back.
Rear Window, he starts off with a broken leg. So
the entire film is in broken leg. And so he's always emasculated. Is that the right word, emasculated?
I mean, like from the first shot, he has a broken leg.
Yeah. He's always held back by this sort of hindrance that has a significant effect on his masculinity. We've talked about spirals as a returning motif in the film, but I think another significant motif is the nosegay, or the bouquet of flowers that Madeleine buys in the car chasing sequence, car following sequence. These flowers represent the ideal version of Madeleine, this fictional character that Scotty is trying so desperately to have. And it also sort of represents Carlotta in a sense, but that's not really as significant. We see Madeleine, or Judy, however you want to put it, sort of tear apart this nosegay. It's under the Golden Gate Bridge, an iconic shot, before she tries and commits suicide. In a sense, that breaking apart, that de-petaling, I think if that's even a word, of the flower, symbolizes her self-destruction. And then we eventually see in Scotty's dream that flower completely disintegrating into like nothing, and therefore her death. And this flower motif is brought up later on, very subtly. Scotty, for Judy, buys her a single rose petal, or not rose petal, just a single rose. It is a mere fraction of the beauty of the nosegay. And sort of this, it's quite very melancholic in the sense that Scotty is insinuating Judy will never be as beautiful as the artificial character she plays. And there's a sense of tragedy to that. And you could also maybe relate that back to Hitchcock and Kim Novak, but I'm not too sure if that lines up. Hitchcock did a very infamous interview with Truffaut. I'm currently trying to read through that now. It's a very long interview, but it's very intriguing. And Truffaut is obviously one of the pioneers of the auteur theory, believing that the director is the true author of his or her or their films. And while that's obviously very prevalent throughout his films, he always has a lot of recurring themes, ideas. I think the best way to analyze it is through Andrew Sarris, who I believe is a film critic, and he had three sort of marks of an auteur. One of them was technique, the next was personal style, and the third was interior meaning. So with technique, what techniques would we say are in Hitchcock's films constantly, and definitely in Vertigo? I would say definitely the dolly zoom in this, or his technical ability.
Yeah, this is actually the first use of the dolly zoom, I think, in kind of mainstream.
It wasn't the first, but it was the one that really sort of like popularized.
Yeah, in mainstream, it's kind of how people recognize it more. It is a pretty cool effect. Yeah,
and I would also say his sort of subjective camera work. He only shows what he wants them to see. It's very specific and meticulous, like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
His personal style, sort of the recurring themes, the wrong man. What else could you say?
Well, I'd just say kind of the in terms of directing style, the German expressionism that he incorporates.
Yeah. The Catholicism, pure cinema, suspense. He's quite to be the master of suspense, and obviously the flawed male characters. This is where this could be considered to be a bit of a stretch, but we have recently looked at Freud. He is a psychoanalyst, very interesting individual that I can't really go much into because that's a very long video if I'm going to fully go into his work.
But he's a very complicated man.
So Freud has a lot of influence on Hitchcock, and we have learned about many different complexes. And I think the one that's most prevalent in this film is
the id, the ego, and the superego.
That's not a complex, but that is true. Yes,
that's the three Freudian. See, there's lots of different layers to this. So you have those kind of three those three main, what do you call them, like theories that Freud came up with. But then you've also got mainly the Freudian slip, which is an interesting one, which is kind of people say what they might mean, but it might be kind of a subconscious sort of thought. So I can't think of an example of a Freudian slip. I wouldn't say
it's in this film though. Freudian slip. I wouldn't say it's in this film.
No, I'm trying to think of an example generally, but
I don't think we should really say. But yes, you are right. But I think you were maybe somewhere good with the id, the superego, and the ego. These three neuroses. Is it neuroses?
Yeah,
I think are sort of battling in Scotty's mind. This one.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to point out was the Oedipus complex, and that's prevalent between Oedipus complex between Scotty and Midge. They used to date.
Midge is obviously a very kind of caring and motherly figure, and
very maternal.
Not a lustful figure to Scotty.
And to elaborate, the how to say it again? Oedipus complex is when a child or the sort of son or daughter. Oh, no, I don't say this. So it's the child of.
It's a son. It's a son.
Is it the son? Oh, so it's when the son has feelings for the opposite sex, so the mum, but it's the parents, basically.
The son has sexual feelings for their mum because they're jealous of their dad.
Yeah, that's sort of the way to put it. Yeah. And that's sort of hinted at between Midge and Scotty, but depending on how you deeply want to view this film, that's very subjective. So we won't go too much into that at the moment. On that note, I think this is where we end the podcast. Obviously, we didn't review it this time, but if I could get a quick review out of you, Daniel, how are you going to rate this film?
It's okay. It's not a terrible film. It's definitely not the best film of all time. I'll give it a solid 7 out of 10. I'd say maybe an 8.
Interesting.
I might push to a 7.5, maybe an 8.
Okay. I remember I saw this for the first time. I liked it, but I wasn't a huge fan of it. But it's really grown on me, especially how like deep and complex it is, and also how it's like one of the most captivating uses of pure cinema in a dialogue film, or a film with sound, I should say. And why it's not the best film of all time, I think it's one of the best, definitely. So I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Well, we all know what the best film of all time is.
What would that be, Daniel?
It'll be film. It'll be episode 20 on our channel. Go check it out.
Episode 20. Don't
continue.
That was very shameless, Daniel.
I'll plug it up here for you in the top right, just so you can watch it. A quick link to
it. And on that note, we'll end it here. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back next time with probably an analysis. And yeah, we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.